so much for tuning in to another episode of the RBJ Talk Show. I brought on yet another awesome superstar who's a therapist, who's a coach, who's a presenter, who's a workshop facilitator. This is just like the beauty of my life right here, is that I get these resources as friends and creative collaborators and stuff. So I couldn't help but bring on Kari Knutson today, who is a therapist, a coach, a speaker, a presenter, a workshop facilitator, and my favorite, a storyteller and an actress. Yay! And she has a one-woman show, so I love her already. A big thing that we talked about, that you talk about, is EQ. All right, we're just gonna dive right in. So, okay. And actually, I'm gonna call it out. I'll say. So I said to you, like, Kari, how does not understanding EQ stop us, or how does EQ stop us from getting what we want? And you said,
No, Ron, it actually helps us. EQ actually helps us get a lot of things that we want.
So why don't we, like, similar to, like, I have a lot of clients that are like in financial services, and they're like, we're not taught how to interact with money in school. Why are we not taught anything? Or at least in our generation, like, we weren't taught about EQ. That wasn't a word I heard until like my late 20s. I was like, oh, I don't have to feel bad about not being technical. Like, I'm pretty emotional. So like, oh, EQ, that's an intelligence, right? Like, why is it something that we're not taught?
Well, now it comes in a couple different names. Like, some people teach it and they call it soft skills. Other people definitely use the words emotional intelligence or EQ. EQ stands for intellectual quotient. But a lot of people call it emotional intelligence, EI, but EI doesn't sound as cool as EQ, because EQ, intellectual quotient, kind of compared to IQ. Our emotional quotient, EQ, intellectual quotient, IQ. So they're trying to make a comparison, how smart you are with a certain part of your brain versus how smart you are with your feelings and your heart and your connection. And I think it's hard to actually teach these things in a formal setting unless you know what it is. And that's why a lot of my work is like, learn it for yourself first, and then you can apply it to the people you work with, or if you're a teacher, the kids that you teach, or if you work with groups, then you can apply it. But kind of EQ has gotten a little bit of a bad rap in terms of being a manipulative tool. Like, oh, if I use my body language a certain way or ask you leading questions, I can sell more products, or I can do this if I use my soft skills to sell you. And EQ isn't about selling anybody on you or getting them to trust you to make a sale. A lot of people say, how can I use this to increase my sales? And I'm like, you can't. You can only use this to know yourself better and connect with other people. Then if they want your services, great. I find that more people tend to connect with people relationally, and then they care about your service or what you have to do. They want to have a relationship first, or feel like there's some trust established. And you can't ever say like, oh, trust me. You can just trust me. The first one someone says that, I'm like, I'll decide when I trust you, right? Or when someone says, this is a safe space, I'm like, is it just because you made it a safe space? You just said it, it's a safe space. Like, you have to build trust. You have to build relationships, and EQ is a great way to do both. If you know what it is, though, if you just kind of think it as a marketing tool, it loses all its power.
Okay. Oh my God. Okay. So Kari, I have trust issues right now. I'm serious.
You want me to go to therapy mode, Ron? Who are you having trust issues with?
Okay, I'll tell you. Well, no, but this is a great way to walk through it, and because like this is what I'm starting to do with the show. Is like literally like I'll throw this out, and then where I'm at in life. And this is what I do with my comedy show. But I'm finding that doing it in this context, like I've heard from people that they're like, oh, that's a really cool way for us to understand. So like the first episode we did with Lisa Foster, she did Enneagram types for all the people in my family. And so it became like how to live with them right now, how to interact with them when we're going through the corona and all this stuff, the quarantine. So, okay, but you brought up trust issues. And so that's like a big thing for me right now. It's like, I realized I have trust issues around relationships. Recently divorced, still very good friends, like co-parents, we live together. My former wife and I, but in terms of getting back on the market, I'm terrified, And so is that like, I'm afraid of emotions. I'm afraid of like the emotional impact. I'm afraid of my emotions going haywire, right? How would you direct someone around that to build trust with another person? And I'm sure the same thing would apply for business or.
Sure. Oh, I like how you say, my emotions, I'm scared of them, whatever. Like, EQ really is a lot about getting to know yourself first. One of the bookends of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And that has to do with like, what are the emotions going on inside of me? What stories do I tell myself about why am I scared going back out there? What do I tell myself about my trust issues? What stories have I created around what I tell myself, right? So part of the self-awareness is like, who am I based on the stories I'm telling myself, right? And are these stories helping me or hurting me? Or are these stories things that I want to continue? Because there are choices we can make around our self-awareness, like being thoughtful about like cause and effect. Here's an example, being thoughtful about like, let's say something happened to you, a cause happened, and the effect is now I don't trust. So somebody cheated on me or hurt me, and now I'm choosing not to trust other people. Or I went out on one date, it wasn't very good, so now I'm scared to go on another one. And so the cause and the effect of that, like you just kind of tell yourself the story and expect it to be true. So a person who's cultivating their self-awareness might say to themselves, okay, I went on that date and it wasn't very good, and I didn't like that experience, or I was uncomfortable. It doesn't necessarily mean that if I try again I'll have the same outcome. Or what didn't work about that for me? What would I change next time? Like if you're talking about being in the dating scene, it'd be more about the story you're choosing to tell yourself about the dating experience that you're having. That's like the first level. But also the second level, which I think is important because you brought up, is around your emotions, being scared of your emotions. A lot of people are scared of their emotions and haven't been taught around like, how do you express anger or sadness or worry or overwhelm? Because I call it the cult of positivity, where we're just supposed to be fine. Everything's fine. I'm fine, you're fine, we're all fine. But really underneath that is all these emotions going on that if you can honor them, sit with them, and find ways to express all of them. I often say people categorize things as good or bad. Like happiness, joy, love is supposed to be good, and we can express those things. But overwhelm, fear, anger, those would be bad, and we're not supposed to, right? So when we categorize emotions like that, we're missing out on an opportunity for what the so-called bad emotions tell us. And here's an example I always give. Like I always say, have you ever been angry? And most people say yes, right? But anger's kind of in the bad category. But if we say, if you've been angry, has your anger ever served you? Has it helped you set a boundary? Has it helped you express yourself? Has it gotten you out of a bad situation? Has it been an internal compass that something's not right? Yes. So instead of looking at anger and being like, oh, I shouldn't be angry, or I should push that away, if you can, I say, bring the emotion up to the surface and explore it with curiosity instead of judgment, that no emotions are good and no emotions are bad. They all just are. And I always say they're like colors. They're not, you would never say purple is better than green. I mean, you have a preference, but no color is bad and no one's better than another. They're just different. And so I often look at emotions as colors, and I just was like, what if they just are? They're not good or bad, they just are. And what if you saw them that way, and as a guide, as a help, like maybe you're sad for a reason. Maybe you're upset for, and maybe you don't trust for a reason. You have to explore that a little bit with, but again, I like put it out here and look at it with curiosity, not judgment. That's a shift in your self-awareness.
That's huge, Kari, because like that's definitely something I have to share that like has been a huge shift for me in the past 3 years of doing mindful work and really seeing an evolution in my own happiness and joy and grounding. I had a client, she said to me a few years ago, she's like, emotions are like trains, like subways. Like another one will come in 15 minutes.
That's so good.
Isn't that great? And in that moment, I remember like every emotion. That's when actually when I live with Kari, so she's in the other room right now. But like when things started going south with us, like every emotion, like I was like, you know, and it begs the question that I'm dying to ask you, and I apologize if this is like the most like on the nose, childish question you've been asked today. So then, you talked about truth, right? I believed at that time that anything that I thought or felt was true, because isn't that what EQ or IQ, certainly IQ, like it implies that if you're thinking it, it must be real, brilliant, and true. Then I thought the same thing would be the truth for EQ. Is that crazy, Tom?
No, it's not crazy town, but the idea of the truth, I think we always have to say you're at the center of your own truth. I don't think there are things that we can objectively say related to how we experience the world that are true. Like two people can look at the same situation and take away two different ideas for what happened, right? Or a conversation. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and later they come back to you and they say, well, this is what I took from that conversation. And you're like, for real? Like that wasn't even my point at all. Or I wasn't feeling that towards you, or I didn't, but some people take things the wrong way. So I always say be careful when you have the idea of the truth, because it's really your truth. It's how you're experiencing the world. It's the lenses that you see the world through. Also, you are what your mind does. Anytime you have an experience, you're collecting all your past experience with that idea. Like, so let's say it's my job interview. Let's say I go to a job interview and I my mind says, okay, a job interview goes like this because I've had all these past job interviews, right? So then I come in and I prepare in a certain way because that's my perspective and that's how I show up. So like, I say job interview because recently I was in a job interview panel and someone showed up in sweats and flip-flops. And I was like, do you know what a job interview is? Like I just had it in my own mind. I'm like, oh, how can you show up like that? And I thought in their worldview, maybe they don't know how to show. I mean, their truth of what it takes to show up as a good interview candidate is very different from mine, right? And in relationships, you know, when people get upset at you in relationships or in communication, sometimes our truth is just that, it's ours, and we have to keep some space for other people to have their truths and ask them. Sometimes I'll say to people, tell me what you're seeing. What did I miss about this? Explain to me how you see this. Show me more about what you're understanding of this conversation. Like sometimes you have to like get into someone else's head because you don't actually know their truth and you can't assume to know it either. And your truth never trumps anyone else's truth. It simply is yours. It doesn't mean it wins because it's yours.
Well, that's that. I mean, to be fair, like that's what kind of for me was when I realized, like in the relationship as it was heading south, when she finally felt comfortable to be like, okay, I'm gonna tell you the truth or my truth and what my experience was, and I was like, oh, wow, I see that. Like I see all of that. That sucks. What a shitty experience you had. Like, and then I lost trust in myself ultimately because I was like, well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a dick. You know what I mean? Like, what's the point? Like what's the point of subjecting someone else to that, you know? And so like in the work that you do, like is a lot of that work about decoding truth between two people by understanding, by self-awareness and by understanding like the what components of the EQ do you play with, do you interact with?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about what EQ has involved with it. Okay. So emotional intelligence is really not one thing. I talk about 5 components of it. And I could talk about in my version of EQ, it's about how we perceive and really process our feelings and what perspective we get on them. So it's like, it's how you process your feelings, but it's also has to do with the first, I call it buckets. Like self-awareness is the first one. How you think about your thoughts, what you say to yourself, how aware you are of how you're coming off to other people, your body language, your tone, your intention, all that self-awareness piece. Then the next bucket that I talk about is self-regulation, how you have the emotions that you're going to have emotions. How do you regulate them appropriately? So, and what does self-regulation look like in a real person's life? So like, you can't just say you're going to have an emotion and then use a stress ball or take a breath. Like, how do you really regulate emotions in different settings for different situations? So you become aware of your own thoughts and yourself in the world, and you become aware of your emotions. Then you learn how to regulate them appropriately for yourself. Then I talk a lot about what we're motivated for. What are you motivated to achieve in relationships, in your job, in your life? What motivates you internally and externally? And then I also talk about empathy and the role of empathy. We tend to think of empathy for other people, but I talk about have empathy to yourself first. Have empathy for yourself first. So like when you just said, I got all this feedback on what a jerk I am, and then I start to feel like bad, you probably were doing the best you could with what you had at the moment. And now you've gained some new insight. So to me, having empathy for yourself would look like, you know what, maybe I have been a jerk in the past. I have to think about my intentions moving forward and who I am. If I have empathy that I've been through some hard things, and like treat yourself like you would treat a friend that had just been through something. Like maybe you were crap, like shitty in this experience, but that doesn't mean you're a jerk for everything, right? Because we all are jerks in some way or another to other people. So that thinking, giving empathy to yourself, first, so then you can extend that empathy to other people. And so that's the fourth kind of bucket that I talk about. And then the fifth bucket I talk about is relationship skills. I believe we're all connected to each other in really profound ways, but we don't often act like that. So when we think about our connections to others, how do we treat people like we're truly connected? And I feel like now more than ever, we're really realizing our connections to people are vital. But when you see the spectrum of EQ, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, relationship skills, all those kind of tie in together to a really powerful, exciting kind of, I'd say, your repertoire of things to pull from to help you, what all of us are trying to do, like not just be a better person, but to evolve in the person we're supposed to be. That self-aware person that knows how to connect with other people and deal with all of our emotions. And we know what we're motivated to do in our lives past like, I need to make this much money or pay this for my mortgage. It's like, what am I motivated to contribute through who I am and sharing my gifts with the world? Right? So I think EQ is so powerful because it's not one thing, it's a bunch of things, but you can use them as resources to help yourself get to that idea of like, how do I want to fully express myself in this life? And what does that look like for me from a place of consciousness and thoughtfulness?
That I hear you 100%. That sounds overwhelming as hell, though, to a lot of people. I bet, right? To do that work, that much self-awareness, to unearth so much. Well, what I mean, what do you think? What stands in the way of people doing that work? Do you think, or that you've seen? I think you're pro.
What
Like what?
people from doing self-awareness work? Fear, the number one thing that stops us all from everything. I think that it's hard to put a microscope on yourself and be like, okay, I want to look at myself a little deeply, because we get scared. We kind of like, I really do think that our brain is wired to be on autopilot. We think the same thoughts, we do the same actions, we respond the same ways. We're kind of habitual because our brain is a little bit kind of, I'm trying to think of how to say it, like it works on autopilot because then our brain can be reserved for other things. Like if I know where my shoes are and I know what to eat for breakfast and I take this route to work, my brain's not having to like think about that. But with self-awareness, you have to stop and be like, are my actions and behaviors serving a greater purpose? Like, can I become aware enough of myself? Can I break down the paper tiger of fear? That's what I call it. It's the paper tiger. But like you said, I don't want to deal with my emotions. Self-awareness might have to be doing like, what makes you upset? When someone calls you out about being a jerk, like you said, like what feelings does those bring up for you, right? Of failure, or I'm incompetent now, or I'm unsuccessful. Like sitting with that to me is like, takes a brave, courageous person to want to sit with that. So it's easier to just, I say, like a lot of people like push the emotion away, just push it away and just keep going. But really the reason self-awareness is so important is because it can shift the feedback you get about who you are with a little bit of light on self-awareness. And it's a loving, compassionate light. Again, not a judgment light. It's not shining on like harshly. It's looking at yourself with curiosity and compassion to say, wow, why am I responding this way? What makes me mad about this situation? What triggers me when this person treats me like that? How come this relationship isn't as strong as I'd like it to be? What's keeping me from either putting a boundary up or stepping back or really moving in? And it's the curiosity about who you are, but you can't be judgmental. I think fear and judgment kind of are bookends that kind of squash the little flicker of like self-awareness. It's like a flower that needs some time to grow, and you can't expect it to be overnight, and you can't squash it down with fear.
Well, and fear and judgment, those are like intellectual acts, right? Or intellectual behaviors, right? Fear and judgment, those are coming from the head normally. Like it's an analysis of what could not work, right? So it's like, what's cool about what you're saying that I really like is that, sorry, as I'm playing with stuff on my desk here. This is what it is right now, right? What it is that I really like is that you can increase, like, can you increase IQ as quickly as you can increase EQ? Because it sounds like EQ is a process that you can increase throughout your life. The more aware you are, the more you're looking at what's triggering you, and then thereby being able to circumvent it or work around it or work through it or look at it. I love how you said, like, look at the negative things as there for a reason. But you can expand your EQ versus, I don't know that my IQ can raise, right? Is that a thing that can happen?
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up, because what I say when I do my presentations is I feel like IQ is fairly static. And IQ, your intellectual quotient, is a number you were given at birth based upon how your brain was formed. Like, you didn't really have a lot of say in your IQ. And yes, you can learn new things for sure. You can grow and get new knowledge, but that specific number isn't going to jump a whole bunch in your lifetime. It's kind of, it is what, like, I'm not going to be a neuroscientist tomorrow and understand all that. Like, sorry, mom and dad, like, that's not going to happen, right? But like, the idea between to me, IQ is fairly static. And so are our personalities. Honestly, I think people's personalities don't change that much. We kind of are who we are in our personalities. Like, if we're extrovert or introvert, or if we're early morning risers or late morning risers, or if we analyze things a lot, or if we don't really care about that, like, IQ and personalities, I don't feel change that much. But I think EQ is unlimited capacity for growth, which is why I love talking about it, because you can see growth in EQ. And you can, I feel like, to me, it's a lifetime journey of cultivating. That's what I call it. It's a cultivating EQ. I don't feel like you arrive. And this is the problem I have with some tests that people give for EQ. People either get a great score and feel like, oh my gosh, I'm all set, I'm all done growing. And then other people get a really bad score, and then they'll say to me, I don't think I have any EQ. And then that breaks my heart, because everybody has EQ. Every single person has EQ. It's just cultivating it, learning about it, and sharing it, like sharing your ideas about it. That's what helps it grow. So to me, IQ, not interested. Personality, I'm not into changing people's personality, but EQ is like the untapped inner well that will keep giving and giving your whole life long. Like, I'm never going to stop learning about my EQ.
Well, yeah, like, that's really cool too. Cause like, yeah, I just thought about that. Like, I know so many times, I remember, like, as a coach, it's funny to me now looking back when I go to my voice teacher in Chicago, and I wanted to sing so bad, and I literally couldn't sing on key successfully until I was like 30.
Oh.
For a lot of, yeah, it's a lot of sensory stuff and whatever. It started happening at 30, and then it still took, like, literally last night, I'm 40 now, and last night I recorded a song yesterday, like, just playing around. I recorded on my phone. I was like, oh, that's the sound I always wanted, like, I was like finally happy with it yesterday. But I remember going to my voice teacher and wanting so badly just to walk in and for him to be like, that's amazing, and I was like, how is that that's like so not helpful. Like, if he would have said that, that's not, like, he's like, no, like, I didn't have that mindset of like growing and advancing at the time. I just wanted to be given a good score. And that's fear, insecurity. I could see where so when you said that people take emotional tests, I'm like, oh yeah, like, I would want to get this amazing score, when in fact, it sounds like you're saying like that the scores don't matter, because what it matters is how are you triggered? How are you responding to your circumstances around you and creating truths? And thereby you can shift those truths and expand your agency, right? Expand, like, your ability to be more malleable, to not freak out, to not clinch, to not let emotions run the gamut of control over you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's your own test. You're on your own kind of track or whatever you want, analogy you want to use. You're on your own race. Like, you can't lose to yourself. That's why, to me, like, I want to get a score. I think we're really driven to, what's my score? What did I get? How do I compare to others? And our society is very driven by that. So people who want to kind of wrap it up, what's my EQ? Okay, I'm good. It's all set. That, to me, it's more like, when you're kind of in a relationship, you kind of date, you check person out, you're trying it out. Like, you don't just like, hey, you want to get married tomorrow? Like, you kind of evolves, right? And then in our relationships with our friends, we even evolve. In our relationships with ourselves, we evolve. Like, I'm a very different person now than I was 10 years ago, because of a lot of life things that happen, right? And I am using my EQ so much differently now in my personal life and my professional life, because I have different challenges now. But I think that what you said is so important. Like, I would want to get a score. That's what so many people say. And it also, when you and I want other people to say, good job, look at what I've done. Part of EQ is like, Are you happy with what you've done? Are you happy with your progress? And also taking in feedback is important, but I always think about like who's giving the feedback, what's the value of the feedback, and am I trying to please all the people all the time? Like I oftentimes in my presentations, I'll get like 99 good reviews, and then one person will be like, you talk too fast, or you turned around too much, or you I didn't understand this slide, or you didn't use Daniel Goleman's precise thing, you made up your own thing, or whatever the little thing they're going to say. And sometimes those 99 comments will be wiped out by that one person who said something, and I'll think about it and I'll wonder about it, and I'll try. And again, it's important to look at the feedback, because a lot of feedback has helped me grow. And I wouldn't have gotten it unless somebody said, hey, do you know you're doing this, or this is bothersome, or I didn't like that, or I didn't understand that. But sometimes when it's a criticism, like I have to be like, am I doing presentations so people like me? Or am I doing presentations so they get great content? And when I get feedback, is it affecting my ego, or is it affecting my service, or is it affecting my persona? Like what's the loop there? So part of my EQ is like deciding what feedback is valuable, and also having courage enough to put myself out there anyway, even though I know everyone won't think it's awesome, and being self-aware enough to know I'm doing this for a purpose, and I'm continually getting better at what I do based on feedback, but I'm not doing it because I want people to be like, good job, good job. I'm doing it because I have my service, I think, in this world is to give this information in a palatable, interesting, accessible way.
So, okay, this is cool. So so there is this intellectual component of analysis or interpretation of our emotions, right? So when we're in a situation where we're struggling, because you talk about like how you use it. So I want to move into that direction of like how we use it, right? So it is okay then to analyze the emotional component of our reactions, right? Or the emotional response that we're having.
Oh, definitely. That's being realistic about it. Like, when your feelings get hurt, instead of denying it, to be like, man, that really hurt my feelings, or that criticism really cut deep, or like, but then again, to look at it instead of like, see, and I should just give up. And like you saying just now, you found the sound that you want, right? Because of time, patience, and something in you. Is anyone paying you to make that sound or do that thing? Or is it something you feel like, oh my gosh, like that's the motivation people talk about. Like, what are you motivated? Why do you want to make that sound so bad?
I'd make the argument that over the years, people paid me not to do it.
See, but you did it anyway. And that to me is like, you are so motivated by something internally to produce something at a level that works for you, despite maybe criticism or feedback that it won't be good, or someone are like hoping, do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like it? Instead of like, I got a great sound that I want to put out in the world, that I want to really hone. But that's like patience, time, cultivating your craft, right? Like really showing up with courage. And I think part of EQ too is cultivating enough courage to look at yourself and be like, what do I have to share in this life? Like, what's my gift? And am I courageous enough to share it? Because some people, their gift is painting. Some people, it's like being kind to animals. And some people, it's doing a talk show situation, or some people it's playing in a band. Our gifts aren't like your job, but it's how you show up and express yourself, right? So, but having the courage to do that, especially when people like, you want to do what? Like, I've had so many people I've done so many random things that a lot of people are like, you want to do what? Why are you doing, like, play it safe, or, like, what kind of job is that? Or if you're a therapist, why are you speaking? Why don't you are you still a therapist and a public speaker? Like, and a storyteller and a coach? Like, I had a hard time fitting myself into like one thing, but I love everything I do so much. And I think it's part of expressing what I'm supposed to express, and this way, this way, this way, and this way. And if it doesn't work for you, don't do it then. Do your own work.
Well, that's really cool. So like, walk me through then in that case, 100%, like walk me through the journey of you not knowing about EQ and how you learned about it and how you implement it now. Like, how are you using it to help people grow in their practices or in whatever they're doing?
No, I love your questions, Ron. They're so good. So I was in higher education for a long time, and I decided at some point that I really was getting away from people and getting more into paper. And I wanted to switch. I was like, oh, I think I'm supposed to be a therapist. I'm really like, I was doing a lot of work in student affairs. And I just had this light bulb come on around the work I was doing. And I'm like, I think I'm really connecting to people, but I want to do it in the way that connects I want to learn more about psychology. I want to learn more how to use it. So I went to grad school at 28 to get my degree in counseling. And ever since then, I've been working in different practices, inpatient, outpatient, schools, private practice, depending on where I live, just all different things. And that's when I learned about EQ, like what is the concept of it, but really only probably in the last 6 or 7 years did I start to study it, because it kind of grabbed my attention as a tool that in the literature wasn't accessible. It's kind of in the way it's researched and the way it was written, I think it was powerful, but I'm like, you know what? Nobody can access this information. No one's going to read this research book about EQ. But what if I could take the content and make it accessible to people? And so that's kind of my tagline when I say taking psychology off the couch, because you know how people expect to come to your therapy office and sit on your couch and talk about their mother. I mean, some people will really walk into my office and be like, do I tell you about my mother now? I'm like, if you want to. but so my idea, because I'm like, you know, there's so many tools in psychology that are lost in psychological jargon, or with people who have the information but don't know how to translate it into really usable information. So I just kind of made it my mission randomly, I guess, but I was so passionate about the idea of the power behind EQ, but I didn't think the messaging was good. So I'm like, how can I translate what this powerful concept is and translate the messaging into things that everyday people could use? So people who aren't coming to see me as a therapist, people who aren't in crisis about anything, but could use these tools to help them make not only their personal relationships better, but their professional ones too. So that's how I just got really excited about the concept. And so in my role as a therapist, I use these concepts a lot when I work with people, but then I thought, what if I take this off of the one-on-one relationship and speak to larger audiences about the power of EQ? And that's when I started my speaking career.
That's awesome. And what was the impact? Like, I could already see kind of how this plays out, but like, when you're speaking, what are the biggest changes that you're seeing from your audience and hearing back in the positive feedback? How are people receiving this, and how are they implementing it in their lives?
Oh, my favorite part is when I see people respond to things, because in my presentations, I tell a lot of stories, how to apply the information, but I tell a story about it or how it looks in real life. And sometimes people are like, oh my God, it's like you're in my head, or like, you get me. And I'm like, yeah, because we're sharing a very human experience. And when you speak about things in human terms, like a time when you felt overwhelmed, a time when you were embarrassed, a time when you were indecisive. And then EQ talks about how to connect those feelings with tangible ways to respond to them. So what I love afterwards is people feel like affirmed, and they feel not so alone in their struggle, and they feel motivated for kind of how to express themselves instead of like defeated, which a lot of times people come into presentations one of two ways: either with their arms crossed, like, I don't want to talk about feelings, this is stupid, how long is it going to take, I'm not a feelings, because they think emotional intelligence, and I'm a therapist, so it's going to be all about feelings. So I get a lot of this body language. Or other people who are really interested, but they're worried that it's going to open a can of worms because they're so emotional anyway, and they're not sure if they're good enough, and can they learn this, and is it too complicated? And I think those are the kind of people who are like interested to learn, but kind of the story they've told themselves about EQ is that it's not accessible for them, or they couldn't do it, or they'll get a bad score anyway. So to me, when I talk about EQ being, how do you regulate your emotions, right? And how do you look at them in a different perspective? To me, that's an invitation to think of EQ a little differently. And the way I present to use it, I feel like people leave knowing what it is and how to use it in their lives, and then they feel inspired. And that's why I put my tagline for my business, educate, train, inspire, because that's my goal, to inspire people to look inside themselves and see the power they have inside to make the changes they want to change. Like, they don't, like, so many times we look to other people, like, do this program, read this book, subscribe to this person's way of thinking, ask somebody else because someone else knows better than you. And EQ turns it right back into be like, no, you know best for you. If you can get in touch with that powerful part of yourself, that intuition, that self-awareness that's telling you how to improve, how to change, how to live a better life, how to shift your thinking, how to be more powerful in your engagements with other people, whatever it is, you know better than anyone else. And EQ, I think, puts the power back in you. So a lot of people leave inspired and motivated, and it makes my heart happy when they want to hug at the end, or like share stories. Because I have to tell a quick story about, I had an agent one time, and I had called her after an event. I said, "Oh, it was so great. We hugged, we cried, we laughed." And she goes, "Wait a minute. Did you just say you were hugging people?" I'm like, "Yeah, we hug. I mean, sometimes we just feel so connected. We hug." And she's like, "No one hugs the presenter after a presentation." I'm like, "Well, I hug. Maybe I'm a presenter that hugs. You don't know me." Like, I was like, "I'm gonna hug any last person who needs a hug." So that's one of the things I do. Like, people do want to hug or connect because they feel like we shared something, and that's my favorite part of a presentation, when people come up afterwards or email me or want to talk or want to hug, because I feel like I've made a personal connection, and I love the feeling of that experience that keeps me coming back again and again.
Well, so it's so powerful because so many speakers just want to like dump, like, you guys, here's what's not working and you need to change it, right? So many people dump that shit. And it's like what really clicked for me right now when you're talking, I was like, oh yeah, like the experience of watching you is like, you're taking, like, you're right, it's not just about, I get it now. Like the EQ is not just about understanding what an emotion is, right? But it's thinking about yourself as someone who can expand and grow and have mastery in how you, again, react to it, or how choices you make based on it, versus just like, oh, okay, so I'm going to look at misery. Why was I miserable? Well, because when I was 7, blah, 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 right? Your experiences or your way of framing it, and seems in couching, in the sense of, in like the couching or in the therapy sense, like it seems like you're couching it as a growing thing. So a presentation of yours is like you're experiencing expansion in mastery, versus like instantly, versus just like, here's what you don't know and here's the problem and you need to pay me $10,000 to know something more.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So I
totally.
love that.
And that's my whole approach, is like, you know better. And also, not only you know better than anyone else, if you will listen to your best self, right? If you'll drop the facade, and if you'll drop kind of the blocks that you have, like, to knowing yourself. But also the idea of like, we need each other, and it's good to get feedback from other people, but at the end of the day, you're doing the best you can with what you have at any given moment. So like, if once you know better, you can do better, right? And once you have some insight into your behavior, you can adjust it. And everyone's on a journey, and that's why I think the important part is to affirm nobody is wrong or bad. No one's out there trying to do a bad job. But like, I've consulted sometimes with people who say like, "I don't know what I'm doing to not get the results I want with my team." And so they don't have a lot of awareness about how they're coming off. So we might like talk about how they come off in their interactions with their body language or tone, or thinking. Like, I worked with someone once who really wanted to get right to the point, so they didn't do the niceties of like, "Good morning," or "Nice to see everyone," or whatever, and they came off as, even though they didn't mean to. So some of the feedback was around like, could you add a little bit of like, "Good morning everyone, here's how we're going to start today," or like when you're meeting with someone, like, "How are you doing today? Nice to see you. Here's our plan for the meeting," instead of, "Here's our plan for the meeting, this is what I need from you." And people would be like, kind of thought that she was harsh, and she didn't mean to be, but some of that awareness around, how do I connect with people, how do I add some softness here, how do I get the results I want through thinking about other people's perceptions of how am I coming off, even right now in this video, how am I coming off? I have some control over that, but not total, right? So like, I would analyze later, how am I coming off? Is this working? Where's my eye? Where am I supposed to be looking, right? Like, I might get some feedback on like how I can come off better, and I might take that into consideration next time I do an interview, or I might take that into consideration next time I'm connecting with someone, right? So there's the opportunity to learn if you're open enough to learning and taking in the feedback.
Well, this is so badass. Like, it's so I'm like kind of a lot embarrassed, because I really didn't know too much about it. I just knew like EQ, emotional, having an understanding of your emotions. But you're talking about creating a shared truth in the most effective, targeted, guided way possible, in a healthy way, right? So it's like the communication process. When I used to teach public speaking in colleges, like the first day was like, we talked about communication process, which is creating and then sharing meaning so that we're both on the same page. right? So like I was talking about I mean, like in marriage, it's so easy to say, oh, like Kari told me the story of like broccoli, like when uh, a husband comes home, dinner's on the table, and he goes, "Oh, we're having broccoli again." And either the husband or the wife, whoever made the broccoli, hears broccoli again. Really, fucking broccoli again? This is what we're having? When for them it was just an observation. So what is the truth, right? What is the truth? So, and I said like meaning was not like he said broccoli, meaning, oh, that is a piece of broccoli. The other person heard that is a piece of shit. Like that is not what I wanted for dinner tonight, right?
But
So
can you imagine in that conversation, let's say that's your reality, right? Someone says, "Oh, broccoli again," and then you choose to take it like, "You don't like my cooking. You never," and then you made up a whole story about it. And instead of saying something like, "Tell me more about what you mean by that," or like, "Do you want a different vegetable another night?" Or like, "How about when you cook, you do it," or whatever. Or they're just being able to say, "Honey, I'm just commenting that we're having it again. I didn't mean anything." Like, and being able to have that conversation without it turning into, "You never like anything I cook anyway. See, this is just how you are," and like making a whole, because that's what we do in relationships. One little thing can like, "You don't like my mother, and that's what this broccoli is about," and whatever you're gonna be upset about, right? Like that's what it tends to emote. So like EQ, really the ability to perceive and evaluate emotions, like perceive what's going on, evaluate in the moment, control some aspect of your response to that, right? And really have a better outcome, right? Because someone could be saying, "I don't broccoli again," and they could be being a jerk. You're like, "Yeah, just damn straight broccoli." Or you could be like, "Broccoli, you hate me, and they hate my broccoli." Like, again, how your story is going to play out. It's such a good example that a simple thing can turn into what's the truth of the statement. Depends on the eye of the beholder.
So then emotions is the thing that we're feeling in response in the moment, right? In the moment. And then probably based on the filters and lenses that we put in front of it, like you said, like the mother, 20,000 conversations we've had up until the broccoli moment. But the intelligence component of it is the analysis, the awareness, the in-depth work, and then the ability to shift it.
Yes. And the ability to talk about it. The ability to actually talk about it. So I always say the ability to perceive, evaluate, control, and manage emotions. Like those are 4 things, but that's a really tall order. So like evaluating what's happening, managing that issue. And it's hard to actually control your emotions, right? But like your perception of what's going on, like you have to take those things into consideration. Like, how am I perceiving this right now? Right? Like, what is my perception of the situation? Right? And how am I managing my emotions around this? And what's my opportunity to control my feelings or not? Because sometimes, how your head can say, "Do not say anything about the broccoli. Do not say anything," right? And then sometimes you're like, "Broccoli," like whatever it is, like you can't control that. It just comes out. So the ability to perceive, manage, control, and evaluate emotions is a huge, tall order. And that's why you don't just arrive at it. I will be working at this for the rest of my life, but that's really what EQ is. In any given moment, I'm managing your emotions, my emotions. I'm perceiving things. I'm figuring out my truth. But my invitation to people is take the opportunity to engage with that instead of closing yourself off, instead of being right all the time and making other people wrong, instead of disregarding your feelings as like good ones can stay, bad ones have to go. And also instead of being like, "This is just who I am, that's it, this is how I showed up." Like there's so much opportunity in you for growth with, again, a lens of compassion for yourself, empathy for what you've been through, and curiosity for what's possible. All those things are inspiring rather than like crushing.
Well, and I love that you're right. So it's not an information dump. It's a place to lift off of. Wherever you are is perfect, and you can lift from there. So let me ask you this as kind of like a final question: is like, if someone, my dream here is that someone is watching the show and they're in a relationship, whether it be professionally, whether it be at home, in a marriage, whatever it is, and they are either themselves a reactive person or they're somehow connected to a reactive person, again, whether it be marriage or professionally. What are 1 or 2 things that they could do right now, like 1 or 2 gifts that they can start implementing today as they build, so that they don't react, so that they don't escalate?
I think the biggest first thing you can do is notice your reactions first, again, without judgment, but notice what sets you up. Like notice when someone says something like, what is going on with me that could make this conversation hard? Or notice, like, a lot of us have repeated patterns in conversations or relationships with people. They say this, then I say this, and we end up mad about this. Like, just notice when that happens, and kind of, again, not with judgment, with curiosity, be like, what if I responded a different way? Or what if I, instead of assuming what someone means, ask them, like the whole broccoli thing, and we go back to the, like, hey, what did you mean by that comment? Or, hey, that kind of hurt my feelings because what I heard when you said broccoli again is this. What did you mean? That takes some courage, right? To get out of our rut and just, because sometimes we like being mad. I mean, sometimes we like to assume like the worst to people and kind of be mad about it. That. He said that again. Of course he did. What a jerk. Like, I encourage you to think about your own role in relationships and take a step back and really analyze, and don't do everything, but maybe pick one scenario or one situation that's bothersome to you and analyze it through the lens of EQ. How can I look and think, what's my perspective on this? What story am I telling myself? What am I responding? What feelings does this bring up for me? And then carefully like look at them all. Again, if you put them out here instead of like back in your subconscious mind, if you brought them out to be like, when this happens, I usually respond with anger, or my initial response is to fly off the handle, or my initial response is to assume something. So what if you took this incident or action here, and then what if you planned a different response for next time, right? What if you actively, consciously thought of a different way you want to respond? Clarifying question, asking someone what they really think, not engaging in the fight, being like, yeah, broccoli, next, like whatever you want to do. But the idea is like, can you consciously think of a different way to respond so you're not just on autopilot? Because I think a lot of our relationships are an autopilot, and sometimes that's to our benefit and it helps, but sometimes with things like you're talking about, if you really want to engage with, like, how am I growing as a person? How am I coming off to this person? How are we relating? And I often say, if people are up for it, if you're in a relationship, it can be great to be like, what makes it easy to be with me? What makes it hard? But you don't want to do that in the middle of like cleaning up the living room before the guests come over, right? So you might want to say like, I've been thinking more about working on myself a little bit and thinking about how I come up. I notice we tend to fight around dishes. And I notice what would make that situation easier? Or every time we bring up finances, it seems to cause stress between us. How can I make that conversation better from my end? What do you need from me? How am I coming off with that? Bossy, controlling, but you have to be ready to engage in the conversation, because if someone says you're kind of bossy around finances, you can be like, I'm not, and you should have said I was doing it perfectly, and this was a chance for my ego to get built, and you better like clap and say I'm amazing. So that's why you have to be a little bit careful if you get to the level of inviting those conversations. But I think sometimes if you can just start with a situation and reframe or make a decision, next time this happens, I'm going to make a conscious choice to respond in a different way. That's level one. And I think getting on to there is eventually when you can talk to them, how do you feel being around me? How do our conversations go? Are there anything how do our conversations feel to you? Is there anything I could do better to help communicate more what I'm thinking or make you feel a different way? I mean, I think that's the different level, but I think it's all there for the taking.
Kari, that was beautiful. Like, that makes so much sense. Like, I can see myself and so many people in my world that like, just those simple techniques of like just taking a break and be like, okay, wait, okay, let me just ask you real quick. Let me get all the information first, and then like, but you acknowledge the emotion. You're like, that hurt my feelings, but wait, before we fight, let me ask you, what is the truth? What are you feeling? And then going, in general, do you feel that has your experience that I've done this? Is your experience that this is a habit or a pattern or whatever? And is that enjoyable for you? Like, what a great way to master your own emotions, by being clear about how the other person's responding, so you're not triggered.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you can take that feedback, again, you have to filter it through, like, is this helpful or not? Would I use this or not? Like, how much do I respect the person? What kind of relationship do I have with them? But I do think taking that, like, I'm really working on how I come up, because sometimes I'm just on autopilot. I just do what I've always done, thought what I've always thought, said what I've always said. And that's where growth is possible.
But this is huge, though. Like, it's just, like you said it throughout this whole conversation, and it's just like huge. The note, I see with my daughter, I don't know if you can hear, she's screaming in another room right now, joking, but playing. But I see with my daughter where I really try to be super sensitive, where I go, like, she's 4, but I still say, like, babe, this is my opinion. I'm not happy with whatever. Like, I don't like, before everything shut down, she was at a preschool that I wasn't happy with. And she liked it. She said she liked it. And I was like, I just want you to know my opinion. I wasn't happy with it. Like, I'm not happy with this thing. That's not your opinion. Or if I have money things, like, I don't want it just to be that dad that's like, what do you think? Money grows on trees? I'll say, like, babe, this is my opinion. I don't want to pay $37 for popcorn at the movie theater. Like, that's my money issue. That's my money story. You think it's valuable, that's great. When you have your own money, you can totally pay for it. I encourage you. I just don't feel comfortable with it right now. Like, I'll say things like that to her for, because that's my truth, that's my reality. But it's what I'm also trying to teach her is that, like, and it didn't make sense to me until, like, in my head, it didn't make sense until right now you said it, where we have full fucking control over what we let in terms of feedback. I think we're taught in the first like 8 to 18 years of our lives that parents, teachers, what they say is the rule, and that's the truth. And if you have that one person out of 99 that told you that you sucked, that's the truth. Everyone else was just being, and that's not true. That's not true.
No,
right?
but
Like,
we take it though. That's like when we like accept that into our worldview, we have to really think about that. And I always say, sometimes we believe things about ourselves that aren't true. That's one of my favorite quotes, because you really have to think about it for a minute. Sometimes we believe things about ourselves that aren't true because someone told us, you're always this way. You'll never do this. You can't do, why do you think you can do that? And then we start to believe that somewhere, but it's not true. So that's the invitation from EQ. Like, what are you believing about yourself that might not be true? Or it served you at this part of your life. It does not serve you now. Can you open yourself up enough to be like, what is my belief system or what's going on in here? Right? Like, I always love to say the brain is very different from the mind. The brain is its own thing. The mind has such capacity to shift and change, and it's our emotions. Like, no one says I'm losing my brain. It's like, I'm losing my mind. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a really powerful tool when you can capture the ability and the power of your mind to shift your reality, shift then your actions, and shift then your relationships.
Kari, that was so succinct and beautiful. You're wonderful.
Thank you. It was fun to talk to you. I love it. You're a good question asker. You're a good interviewer. You got me all like riled up.
It's what I do. I get people riled up. That was beautiful. Like, so you do work with individuals. You do work with groups. How do people contact you if they like? Because this was, I don't know, this blew my mind. I'm so happy with you right now. This is one of my favorites. Like, I'm already thinking, because so much of the work that I do with clients is around. We talk about, and we talked about this in a recent episode, the notion of comfort zone. Comfort zone is clearly a bunch of truths that you've created based on emotional responses and based on feedback that you have gotten or have not gotten, or right. So it's like, I'm like, oh, I want us to do a workshop together, but but this is it. This is the thing. This is the workshop. This is it. People get
starter workshop, Ron. Here we go with our starter set.
I love how you talk. I love your words. So how do people connect with you? Like, if people are like, yes, I want to hire her to help me out with this relationship, or I want to hire her to help us out with our team. Like, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Sure. If you go to knutsonspeaks.com, it's KNUTSON.com. And on there's a contact me page. And I get requests from all different people. So sometimes people want like a live event with a big group of people. And then sometimes people want individual coaching, one-on-one. Sometimes people want group coaching. So it really depends on the needs of people. And I try to be very flexible because I like the individual project idea. So, and now that we've gone virtual, I'm dipping my toe into the virtual world. I've given a couple virtual presentations, which have been great. And I've moved all my coaching online, which has been fun. So just reach out to me through knutsonspeaks.com on the contact me page and tell me what you're thinking about. But I do individual coaching, group coaching, and then I do presentations. And all my topics are listed on my page. And now I think there's 17 topics, all branching from EQ. So we started with EQ, and then one of the talks I'm giving a lot of is compassion, fatigue, burnout, and stress. That's another thing. Dealing with difficult people. Working with teams, team dynamics and groups, how to have effective teams, customer service, soft skills. So a lot of those things branch out, and I have all those listed on my website. But I love talking about all this stuff. Everything I talk about comes from the heart of EQ and then goes out.
That's awesome. That's beautiful. You're great. I just adore you, Kari. Kari, thank you so much for your time today. I'll post the link to your website, and if people can get a hold of you. But you were just wonderful, and thank you for putting perspective on how we can like master our reactions and create better, more authentic, more effective truths, so that we don't get into so much conflict. So yeah, that was helpful, right? Like that's super helpful. Like that's what we just did in the past hour. Boom.
You succinctly, you covered it well. I can't even say it better than that, so I won't. But thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, and like I'd love to have you again sometime. You're the coolest.
Oh, just let me know. I'd love to be back.
You got it.